The park in North Haven breathed with gentle autumn energy as families gathered for the town's annual charity event. Laughter danced on the crisp breeze, mingling with the rustle of fallen leaves underfoot. Tables overflowed with donated toys and clothing for children in need, while volunteers moved between booths with practiced cheer, their smiles genuine despite the long day ahead. Among the crowd stood Jackson Whitmore, a billionaire whose name few recognized in this modest community. He had deliberately chosen anonymity today, declining the organizers' offer to introduce him or acknowledge his substantial donation. Instead, he observed from a quiet spot near the oak trees, his tailored charcoal coat catching the afternoon light, hands resting comfortably in his pockets. There was a profound stillness in his expression, the bearing of a man more accustomed to observing life than actively participating in it. Not far away, Aara Monroe, 27 years old, gently maneuvered a small wheelchair along the park's uneven pathway. Her golden wavy hair framed a face marked by quiet resilience, and though her eyes carried the weight of exhaustion, they remained attentively fixed on the child before her. Laya, her 4-year-old daughter, wore a pink dress that seemed almost too vibrant against the muted autumn palette. Her legs remained motionless, but her spirit was fully alert. Her hair was tied into 2 neat ponytails that bounced slightly as the wheelchair rolled over the imperfect ground. From her chair, Laya studied the world with careful curiosity, her gaze lingering especially on the tall man standing beneath the trees. Aara knelt beside her daughter, her voice soft and encouraging. "Do you want to go see the balloon animals, sweetheart?" But Laya's attention had already wandered elsewhere. She watched intently as Jackson crouched down to help a young boy retrieve his dropped juice box, speaking to the child with unhurried kindness. There was something in the way he moved that captured her attention, gentle, deliberate, genuine. No performance, no self-consciousness. Just authentic human decency. A volunteer passing by noticed Laya's intense gaze and smiled warmly. Leaning closer with playful affection, she said, "Would you like that nice man to adopt you? He looks like he'd be a wonderful father." A few people nearby chuckled softly at the innocent suggestion. Aara managed a tight smile, opening her mouth to gracefully redirect the moment, but before she could speak, Laya's voice cut through the ambient noise. She turned her head slowly, looking first at the volunteer, then at Jackson, and finally up at her mother. Her expression was unnervingly serious, composed in a way that made Aara's breath catch in her throat. And then, clearly and calmly, she said, "Please don't adopt me. Adopt my mom instead." The laughter vanished instantly. All sound seemed to fade, leaving a stunned stillness in its place. Several heads turned. The air tightened with surprise and confusion. Even the breeze seemed to pause. Jackson straightened slowly, genuinely caught off guard. He looked down at the small girl who had just said something no one knew how to respond to, something that pierced through the comfortable pleasantries of the afternoon with uncomfortable truth. Aara's heart slammed against her ribs, her cheeks flushing with heat. "Laya," she whispered, reaching for her daughter's hand, torn between wanting to hush her and wanting to hold her close. But Laya remained perfectly still. This had not been an impulsive utterance. She had watched her mother cry quietly behind closed doors late at night. She had witnessed her struggle with shopping bags, with wheelchairs, with bills spread across their tiny kitchen table. She had asked why other children had 2 parents and why her mother always looked away when people talked about families. She had heard whispered apologies she didn't fully understand but would never forget. So when she saw Jackson, kind eyes, calm presence, no trace of pity, something stirred within her small heart. In her young mind, adoption wasn't about legal papers or custody arrangements. It meant a safe place. It meant someone choosing you, loving you, staying. And if anyone in the entire world deserved that more than anyone else, it was her mother. She had decided. Jackson slowly crossed the distance between them and crouched again, lowering himself until he was eye level with Laya. His eyes, usually carefully controlled and unreadable, now held something raw and unguarded. He gently placed his hand over hers where it rested on the wheelchair's armrest. "That's the bravest thing I've ever heard," he said, his voice low and genuinely moved. Aara stood frozen, unable to meet his eyes, her throat constricting painfully. There were no words adequate for this moment. Around them, people watched, not with judgment or pity, but with something closer to awe. No one had expected such a small voice to carry so much devastating truth. Jackson looked back at Laya and smiled, but it was different this time. Slower. Weighted with meaning. In his chest, something long dormant began to stir awake. It wasn't admiration or sympathy or mere curiosity. It was the beginning of a profound realization that sometimes the simplest words, spoken by the smallest voices, could unlock a door you never even knew existed. And so with one sentence, a child had planted the first seed of transformation in a man who believed he had already lived enough to never be surprised again. Before the pink dress and the small wheelchair, before North Haven and late autumn charity events, Aara Monroe had lived a different life entirely, one filled with motion, music, and dreams that seemed destined to come true. At 23, she stood on the precipice of becoming a professional ballerina, having earned a hard-won scholarship to one of Chicago's most prestigious arts academies. Her instructors called her a natural talent. Her peers admired her effortless grace and technical precision. Her future stretched before her like a perfectly lit stage, and she moved toward it with single-minded determination. She always wore her long, softly curled blonde hair in a tight bun during rehearsals, her eyes focused with laser intensity, her heart pulsing in rhythm with every note of music. The stage was the only place she had ever felt truly, completely alive. Then everything changed with devastating swiftness. Just weeks before a major audition that could have launched her professional career, she discovered she was pregnant. The father, a charming street guitarist she'd met during a festival the previous summer, disappeared as soon as she told him the news. No promises broken, no arguments, no dramatic confrontations. Just silence, followed by a changed phone number and an apartment cleared of his belongings. Everyone in her life told her she still had options, that she could walk away, that she could have her carefully planned life back if she made different choices. But Aara chose to stay. She withdrew from the audition. She left the academy. She gave up the spotlight that had illuminated her path since childhood. And when Laya was born, her world shrank first to a hospital room, then shattered completely when doctors gently explained that her daughter had a rare spinal condition. Laya would likely never walk. There was no time to mourn, not for her lost career, not for her old life, not even for her child's diagnosis. There was only survival, and Aara committed to it with fierce, uncompromising determination. Over the next 4 years, she worked every job she could manage. Mornings at a coffee shop where she learned to smile through exhaustion. Weekends cleaning houses where other families lived the lives she once imagined for herself. Nights selling used clothes online, photographing items by lamplight after Laya had finally fallen asleep. She memorized bus routes with the precision of a choreographed dance. She learned to cut her own hair using YouTube tutorials. She skipped meals to afford medications and therapy equipment. She mastered the art of lifting Laya's wheelchair with one hand while carrying grocery bags with the other, her former dancer's strength repurposed for a different kind of performance. They lived in a cramped ground floor unit in one of North Haven's oldest, most deteriorating buildings. The rent was mercifully low, the heating system unreliable at best, but it was safe. And slowly, deliberately, Aara transformed it into a home. She maintained their dignity even when exhaustion threatened to break her completely. Her golden hair was always combed, even if hastily. Her clothes were plain but scrupulously clean. Laya's beloved pink dress had been refashioned from one of Aara's old stage costumes, stitched and restitched with fraying thread and a mother's unwavering care. Their days were small but full of quiet richness. Aara taught Laya her letters using sidewalk chalk on the building's front walkway. At night, she read fairy tales aloud, giving each character its own distinctive voice, her heart swelling at the sound of Laya's delighted laughter. Her daughter loved stories where queens didn't need rescuing and where magic came from within the heart rather than external forces. But even the strongest love bends under relentless pressure. One bitter winter night, after working a double shift and walking home through ankle-deep snow because the bus routes had been reduced, Aara sat at their tiny kitchen table holding a letter from a non-profit organization. She had spent weeks gathering paperwork, hoping they would help fund Laya's next critical round of physical therapy. The answer was no. Missing documentation. Insufficient eligibility criteria. Maybe next year. She didn't cry at first. She simply sat there, hands trembling, eyes unfocused, staring at the words until they blurred into meaningless shapes. Later that night, curled together on their thin floor mattress, Laya stirred and whispered into the darkness, "Mommy, am I a burden?" Aara froze completely. Then her heart cracked open. She pulled Laya into her arms and held her with desperate intensity, tighter than ever before, as if her embrace could physically shield them from every cruel thing in the world. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she whispered fiercely, "No, baby. Never, never, never. You are why I wake up every morning. You are why I fight. You are not my burden. You are my reason for everything." Laya didn't speak again. She simply nestled deeper into her mother's chest, tiny fingers clutching gently at her shirt. And for a moment, despite everything, despite the cold apartment and the rejection letter and the impossible exhaustion, the world felt just slightly lighter. That night, in the quiet of their one-room apartment with its peeling paint and flickering overhead light, something existed that was stronger than struggle, stronger than fear, stronger than poverty or loss. There was love. Pure, unconditional, transformative love. And though exhausted beyond measure and uncertain of tomorrow, Aara held fast to the only truth that had never wavered: she would give anything for Laya. Anything at all. Jackson couldn't get her eyes out of his mind. Aara Monroe. The woman whose name he'd learned only after the fact. There had been something in the way she looked at her daughter, quiet strength wrapped in visible exhaustion, and in Laya, the little girl in the pink dress with the impossibly grown-up voice who had asked him, a complete stranger, to adopt her mother. That moment had etched itself into his consciousness with unexpected permanence. He had attended hundreds of charity events over the years, shaken thousands of hands, met countless faces that blurred together in his memory. But this felt profoundly personal in a way he couldn't quite articulate. A few days later, unable to shake the lingering image from his thoughts, Jackson quietly asked his assistant to gather basic background information on Aara Monroe. Nothing invasive or intrusive, just the fundamental facts. The report arrived brief and straightforward. Single mother. Ground floor apartment in one of the oldest buildings in North Haven, which happened to be one of Jackson's own properties, currently slated for redevelopment. No outstanding debts. No legal issues. No tenant complaints. Just a woman juggling 3 part-time jobs, raising a disabled daughter alone, somehow always managing to pay her rent on time despite circumstances that would have broken most people. Jackson stared at the single page for a long while. It wasn't what the report said that affected him. It was what it couldn't say. It didn't speak of how often she probably cried in the privacy of her locked bathroom. It didn't quantify how bone-deep her exhaustion must run. It couldn't measure what it cost her emotionally to keep showing up for life with grace and dignity when everything inside her wanted to collapse. But somehow, without those details being written down, he felt them all. One afternoon, under the pretense of reviewing site development plans, Jackson visited the building personally. He deliberately stayed back, observing from a distance until he spotted Aara climbing the building's notoriously crooked exterior staircase, a heavy laundry basket balanced in her arms. Her foot slipped on a warped board. The basket tipped precariously. Without conscious thought, Jackson stepped forward and caught her elbow, steadying her with one hand as socks and towels scattered across the landing like fallen snow. "Careful," he said, offering a faint smile. "This staircase might be the next thing to completely fall apart around here." Aara flushed visibly as recognition dawned. "Thank you. I didn't know. That I'm your landlord," he finished gently, releasing her arm with respectful promptness. "Most people don't. And I should have fixed these stairs months ago. That's on me." She nodded, clearly unsure what to say to this unexpected encounter. Jackson knelt and gathered the spilled laundry, handing her the basket with care. Then, without fanfare or expectation of thanks, he left. A few days later, he returned, this time with a small box of homemade cookies from a local bakery and a beautifully illustrated children's storybook. He knocked lightly on the apartment door. Laya answered, her eyes widening with delighted surprise, a grin spreading across her small face like sunrise. Jackson sat cross-legged on their worn carpet as Laya chattered enthusiastically about magical forests and talking squirrels, and how her mother used to be a real princess who lost her crown when Laya was born. He listened with genuine attention, asking questions, following the winding logic of a 4-year-old's imagination. Aara hovered uncertainly in the doorway, quiet and guarded, unsure what to make of this attention. Jackson made no grand gestures, offered no sweeping promises. He simply kept showing up. Sometimes with fresh fruit. Sometimes with puzzles. Once with a small coloring book and a set of quality colored pencils. Never too much. Never with any trace of pity. Only thoughtful presence. One evening, while Aara folded dish towels nearby, Laya asked softly, "Mom, do you miss dancing?" Aara stilled completely, her hands pausing mid-fold. "I do," she admitted gently. "But no one needs to see me dance anymore, sweetheart." Jackson didn't speak, but her words clung to him like morning mist, refusing to dissipate. The following week, something quietly extraordinary appeared in the neighborhood park. A wooden platform had been constructed beside the playground, smooth and stable. A full-length mirror leaned against one supporting post. Fairy lights were strung overhead. A hand-painted sign read simply, "For those who still remember how to dance." Aara noticed it while pushing Laya on the swings. A small group of young girls played on the new platform, spinning and giggling, attempting to mimic ballet moves they'd seen in videos. Some were from the free weekend dance group Aara had been quietly teaching in the community center basement. One mother called out warmly, "Miss Aara, show them how it's done." She laughed awkwardly, shaking her head. "Oh, I couldn't. I haven't." But then music began flowing through carefully hidden park speakers, a soft classical melody, hauntingly familiar. One she had danced to years ago, in another lifetime. Something shifted inside her. She stepped forward hesitantly, placing one foot on the platform, then the other. Her shoulders rolled back instinctively. Her arms lifted with muscle memory that had never truly forgotten. And then her body simply remembered. She moved like breath itself, light, elegant, effortless. As if she had never stopped dancing at all. Jackson watched from a considerable distance, hands in his pockets, a slight smile touching his usually serious features. He didn't approach. Didn't take credit. Didn't interrupt the moment. He hadn't given her a stage to perform on. He had given her back a piece of herself she thought was lost forever. And that, he was beginning to understand, was worth infinitely more than any applause.